There was nothing scheduled for January in the meetup, and we thought, oh well, New Year's party, late Christmas party, should we put something on? And then a few emails were exchanged, and that became this evening. Now it is true, it just so happened that Anne and I had released this book, The Cloud Native Attitude, which is what I'm going to talk about, and so I'd like to thank the DevOps organisers, and Matt back actually gave a very good review to the book, which I'm very grateful for, and actually you're in the cover, you know that, right, Mark? Yay! Okay, so I'm going to sit down because I'm going to try to do something slightly different. When Matt introduced us earlier, he mentioned the cloud native attitude and building green software, but actually it's a double act, because this book was the foundation of Anne's most recent work when she put together her book, Building Green Software, for O'Reilly. So there's a progression from what I'm about to say to what Anne's going to say afterwards. If anyone's got any questions while I'm speaking, just shout them out. Alternatively, when we come back and do a small panel at the end, just let us know. Right, on that note, this is what I'm going to do. Oh, by the way, did anybody buy the book? Has anybody actually bought the book? One person, Daniel. Don't forget to give us a review on Amazon, please. That would be most useful. I'm going to put my reading glasses on. So this is what I'd like to do. So basically, there's three things I'd like to talk about. The first is the story of the book itself. Where did it come from? What we were trying to achieve? And how did it evolve over the years? Because in my opinion, the story of the book is also the story of Cloud Native. What were we doing 7 years ago? What were we doing 2 years ago? And what are we doing now? Then I'd like to talk about the Cloud Native basics, the three building blocks: containers, orchestrators, and microservices. Now, I'm getting a feeling that most people in the room know what those three technologies are. Is that a fair assumption? So I won't linger too long on the details, but I'd like to talk about them in conjunction with each other, and then finally how continuous integration and continuous delivery links those three concepts together. And the last thing I'd like to say, but I need to put my reading glasses on, is then I'd like to give a segue and then introduce Anne at the end, and then bring her on to talk about building green software. Does that sound all right? Yeah. All right, and remember, shout any questions you have. I've never done a book reading before. Do I look nervous? Because I'm shitting myself. Right, no, right, I am a bit nervous. Right, here we go. So we're going to start at the back, which is the acknowledgements, and this is a very important passage actually. So the book itself started, we think, about 7 years ago, and the challenge was, or the problem was, is if you imagine cloud or cloud native being, you know, a horizontal bar of a T made up of microservices, containers, DevOps, bit of management, there was lots of brilliant books on the market. Sam Newman's Building Microservices, Adrian Moat, a friend of mine, really good friend of mine, Using Docker, that was a really good book. But when we looked around and our customers were asking us, well, what is cloud native? There was not a single book we could point to and give it to them. So we were like, okay, well, let's write that book. Now, we didn't think we were going to publish it. We had no intention of publishing it actually. But it was true that a single volume that explains all of the concepts together, the full horizontal bar as it were, did not exist. So we got busy writing it. We launched it as an ebook PDF, and actually it was massively popular. But it was also probably years and years too early, because we thought, and it's because we live in a bubble, we thought the world was ready for cloud because we were into that. We were avid developers, savvy ops engineers, tech leaders. Some of us were doing things like extreme programming, and we understood the concepts pretty easily. And we thought the world was ready, but it wasn't. So actually, the book took off, but it took off within our community. It didn't necessarily take off with managers and leaders and the people who were sort of facing day-to-day challenges. Anyway, so what were we trying to write about? This is the best definition of cloud native, and if anybody's got a better one, I want you to shout it out. So we said about, I'm quoting the book now, if I can actually see it. So we said about, this is what we said about, talking about those wonderful microservice-oriented, container-packaged, web-scale applications that took advantage of the public cloud. At Container Solutions, that is the definition that we have of cloud-native architectures, and that was the genesis of this book. Now, you might be thinking, well, where does the attitude come in? Does anybody want to take a guess? Not you, Anne. Or you, Ian.
You've got an attitude.
I've been accused of that. So the attitude came about because when we started helping our first customers with cloud, the first ones were startups, scale-ups, or medium-sized teams in larger organisations, usually the best teams. But then when we started to help enterprises, big companies, the things that we took for granted at Container Solutions and with our smaller customers, namely psychological safety and risk-seeking behaviour, we could no longer take for granted anymore. So you can't run A/B tests, which cloud native architectures are really good at doing, unless you're happy with failure. And a lot of companies are not happy with failure. So what we realised was it wasn't just the type of technologies and processes you used, but the way in which you were willing to use them. So the attitude was also almost a cry to a call to action. It's not just about the tech, it's actually about something so much more. So that was the beginning of the book and where the name came from. Now we went through a couple of iterations. The second version came out a few years later, and the nice thing is Anne, as part of the work, interviewed a bunch of real life companies who were moving to the cloud. One of them's here. Greg, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
So Greg from Starling Bank. Starling is of course a darling in the cloud space. How many Starling customers here? Yay! How many Monzo? Boo! Boo! Right? And so we interviewed, or Anne interviewed, went to the trouble to speak to lots of different people. But the nice thing is as the book evolved, we could go back, ask similar questions, how's it going? And so what you have in your hands is essentially a guidebook and then a few key case studies that I've developed over the years. Now, this is worth reading out loud because I quite like this bit. I wrote this bit. So as the economic winds changed in 22 and 23, and then continued to blow in 24, the cloud native attitude receded from our memories. Then something happened. Anne had gotten herself busy with a new book, Building Green Software. She called me and she said she'd lent on the cloud native attitude as she was writing that book, and it had held up well. She said, do you want to tidy it up and publish it properly? And by the way, you'll have to do the tidying up, Jamie. So we thought about it and we looked at it, and I printed it out and I looked at the book on a train journey, and I thought actually it is worth tidying up. So all of last summer we've moved chapters around, updated references, tidied the book up, and it is now available of course on Amazon and all good bookstores. So that's what brings us here today. So the book is 7 years in the making, and the reviews have been very warmly received. Actually, the reviews have been fantastic. So we're very grateful to all those people who did that. Okay, right. Now we're going to jump right back to chapter 1. And by the way, you might be thinking you know all this stuff, and that could be true. So maybe you need to buy a copy and give it to your boss. Because does your boss know? That's the issue, right? So what Anne did, what you did in the first edition, Anne, was really smart. So we start in the introduction in the first chapter, which we call the Cloud Native Quest. There's no mention of containers, no mention of Kubernetes whatsoever. Just the 3 reasons why you would use the cloud and go cloud native. Does anybody want to hazard a guess as to what they are? Speed, scale, correct, and
latency, I think. Or something.
oh, maybe.
No.
I mean, it's not in the book. Cost, yeah, it's cost.
Yeah.
So speed, scale, and margin. Let's not fool ourselves. Cloud native is about going quicker, scaling up, sometimes scaling down, and doing so in order to save money. Now, where did the cloud come from? Well, it came from Amazon. It doesn't matter how you look at it. The cloud as we know it, the Google and Azure version, started in Amazon. Jeff Bezos is running around their office screaming, this is a quote by the way, developers are alchemy and they have to be allowed to do their, developers are alchemists and they have to be allowed to do their alchemy. So they were running a web store. So all of a sudden they needed computers, lots of them. They needed to put them in warehouses that were fire suppressed, and snot-nosed developers like me were not allowed to touch them. So if you wanted to move HTML, CSS, or the latest version of the web app to the data center, you had to speak to somebody. It absolutely crippled creativity. So if somebody had an idea at Amazon, for example, for one click, they then had to build it on the development machine and then go through the agony of trying to get it deployed into production. It was a nightmare. So Jeff Bezos and the team at Amazon, they flipped that around. And they said, we are customer-centric, the developers are your customers, you've now got to serve them. Do it, right? Or you'll be fired. That wasn't a joke. He put the last bullet point in that email said, do all of the above bullets or you'll be fired. And so that's how it began. So what came next was the standardization of infrastructure services, a web front end so that developers could order a computer with Java 2 on it as easily as they could order a book on Amazon. But what was behind all of that? What was Bezos going mental about? Speed, scale and margin. They were winning territory on the then fledgling World Wide Web. It was massive. Every new customer would remain a customer. So features coming out slow were unacceptable. They needed to go quick. They needed to scale up and down when it was Black Friday, when it was Christmas, when it was Easter, and it had to be in the service of cost because they counted every single nickel and every single dime. If those are the things that you're trying to achieve in your businesses, Cloud Native can help you. Right? Never forget that. Now the second chapter, this is the next bit of savviness from Anne. Still no talk of technology, it's pretty smart, right? The next chapter has got a picture. Now I can barely see these pictures with my reading glasses on, so I don't know if you lot are going to be able to see them. But the next chapter essentially has got a little picture on of a paper boat, a 1 or 2 man yacht and a cruise ship. And what we're doing in this chapter is asking our readers to stop and think. Are you a startup? Are you a scale-up? Or are you an enterprise? It's not that the technology will change per se, all the processes, but your starting point might change. Where do you want to start? If you're a big enterprise and you've got a massive monolith, you might be wanting to think about how to break that up. And if you do that, you might need to break up your teams to match the architecture, or alternatively, break up your teams so they look like the architecture that you're aiming for. So it's different. And the reason this is important, so if I'm looking at Ian, my long-suffering friend at the back, we've been doing this for years. And when I say doing this, we mean helping people, whether it's friends in the community or customers, we don't really differentiate. And the classic mistake is, first of all, to lose sight of what you're trying to achieve. And the second mistake is to misdiagnose the context you're working in. Because if you're in a bank, it's okay, you can chuck up, well actually Greg was in a bank, but if you're in a bank, what works in a startup where you're less constrained by data rules at least 10 years ago and less constrained by regulation, you will make different choices, you really will. So understanding your context is key to all of this, and what we try to do in the first 2 chapters is help the reader understand the context they're working in. In my experience, and it's in decades right now, measured in, management and managers go wrong when they misdiagnose the context. They diagnose something as simple when it's actually complex, or they diagnose something as complex when it's actually simple. So those are the opening chapters. How am I doing for time, Matt? I'm all right? Yeah? Fine. Okay, so now we dive into technology. Does anybody want to guess what the first technology is in the book? No, who said that? What? No, oh God. No. Containers, yeah, it's containers, yeah, that's right. So the way we see it, the way we see cloud native architectures is that containers is the cornerstone technology, it's the foundational technology. So I wrote in here, there's a reason that we're called container solutions. So containers, you've heard it all before, right? Standard packaging format, lightweight application, isolation, a bit like a VM but less clunky. Standard way to interface with the container, and that all leads to immutable infrastructure. So what? Who cares, right? But those 4 containers lead to extremely important. Hello mate, you all right?
Hi.
For the meetup? Yeah, it is coming in. Welcome, don't be scared, coming in. There's some pizza floating around and drinks and whatnot. Anyway, so those 4 things, yeah, so what? Okay, so you can, the immutable, whatever. What does it give us? Well, actually, it does give you 2 very important things. When we first started building large-scale web applications that had never been done before, we'd built distributed systems before, but we'd built nothing on the scale of hundreds of thousands of simultaneous users. What would happen is what I built in my machine would take us ages to get working in staging or pre-production, and we were not allowed to deploy to live because you would screw everything up and somebody would get fired. Now it wouldn't work. Why? Well, because I was using a bit of information in a database that wasn't available or visible on staging. I'd use a different library, or I'd linked my C files in a different way. Alternatively, I had a text file config.txt or something like that. This was pre-XML days, by the way. I'm a bit traumatized by XML from the first time I saw it in 2004. And so all of these things, all of this configuration would be scattered everywhere. And so what would happen is what would work in one machine or one environment would not work in production. And what would happen is it might work the first time around, but over time it would change. This was known as configuration drift. So the configuration would drift and drift and drift, and then people would say, don't change, don't touch it, just don't touch it. So what would that mean? Long testing cycles, long acceptance testing, and hours of debugging, and you deploy it on Sunday morning at 1 o'clock in the morning so that you could quickly fix anything before your users actually saw. So the thing that the cloud had been designed to solve, speed, margin, scale, had been destroyed because we couldn't figure out configuration. When you put everything in a container, it will work on my machine, it will work on your machine, it will work in production. This was a serious technical problem and a serious business problem. So when I say so what about containers, that's the first thing. Does anybody know what the second big so what is? Anyone want to guess? Actually, that's kind of right, but that's in the next chapter. Yes, orchestration. We'll come to orchestration in a second. The second big so what for me is about packing. So when you hire a computer from Amazon, you hire the whole machine. So the challenge is how do you get it to be 80-90% utilised, because no matter how much you use the machine, you're getting the same bill at the end of the month. So I love this nonsense that the cloud is comparable to the electricity grid, but no it's not, because there's a meter on your house and everything on your side of the meter is your responsibility and everything on that side of the meter is not your responsibility. Hiring a virtual machine from Amazon is like hiring a generator on a dam from Thomas Edison, right? And if you don't use it properly, you still got to pay for it. So they're not comparable. Containers let you pack the virtual machine with lots and lots of computer processes. So you get it to 60, 70, 80% utilised, therefore getting a much bigger bang for your buck. So containers and public cloud infrastructure go together like hand and glove. Before you had to pay a monthly subscription to Amazon, nobody cared about the utilisation of the machines because you'd already paid for them. So you didn't care. They were just sat there doing nothing and you could just chuck your stuff over. We used to use flash drives, but then at some point somebody realised you could send your software using something called the network. But believe it or not, we never used to do that. That was already as late as 2004. Okay, so this is containers. There's 4 key features of containers and these 2 big so whats. Next chapter is orchestration. So when we think of orchestration, this is our definition. This is more you than me, Anne. Are you ready? The basic idea of any orchestrator is that we puny humans don't need to control individual machines. We can set high-level directives and let the orchestrator worry about what's happening on any particular server. Great. What that really means in practice is that operations engineers who used to be responsible for restarting services, i.e. making the system fault tolerant, load balancing, making sure that the virtual machines were packed properly, is now no longer the job of a person. It's the job of the orchestration software. The most famous of which is Kubernetes. But there was something called Apache Mesos once upon a time, and there was something from HashiCorp Nomad, I believe. Still there?
Swarm has gone.
Swarm has gone?
Swarm's gone.
Docker were brilliant. Docker were like, Kubernetes is not a threat to us because we invented Docker and we've got this thing Swarm, and everybody was like that. No. Anyway, there you go. That seems like a long time ago now. So the practical reason or the business reason, just remembering why we got into this conversation to begin with, Kubernetes will let your operations engineers be more productive, so that's the margin question, but your systems will be able to be self-healing, fix themselves, be more fault tolerant, and therefore go down less. So the whole system is much more effective. Third chapter, and then I'm finished. Right? I'm not sure if you're still with me, but it's the third chapter and we're coming to the end. Third chapter is microservices. So It's a question. You're going to have to read the book to get an answer to the question. Microservices, the killer horde. That's the question we're asking ourselves. This is our definition of microservices. The microservice concept is a deceptively simple one. Complex, multi-purpose applications are broken down into small, single-purpose and self-contained services that are decoupled and communicate with each other via well-defined messages. Full stop. Boom. Succinct. I think we've done the world a great service with our succinct definitions. Why are microservices and containers such a nice little pairing? It's a good question, right? So imagine you're Netflix. It's tea time, although they don't call it tea time in America, and I've discovered that they don't call tea time in London either. You call it dinner time. Weird. Weird, right? Weird Southerners. So it's tea time or dinner time or whatever time, and everybody's about to sit down and start streaming. Now Netflix are not playing Amazon for a bunch of virtual machines they're not using in the middle of the day, so they're all switched off. So people start to stream, and containers and virtual machines all start to get scaled up. Now what that means is Netflix only pay Amazon when Netflix get paid. Netflix are only a user of the cloud when their users are using their streaming service. Now what they won't scale up is the logging in microservice and the register new users microservice, because everybody's already a user anyway, right? Why scale that bit up when that's not presently being used heavily? Now flip that around and imagine in some parallel universe it's the Super Bowl and Netflix put on an advertisement. Subscribe to Netflix now. If you're not already a Netflix user, subscribe now and get a full 90% discount. All of a sudden people start logging in and registering the details. So you scale that microservice up. Now I know what you're all thinking. So what? So what? How would we have done that in a monolith? That's the answer to that question. So in the olden days, if you had a monolith, if Netflix was a big stinking monolith and everything was in the same application, and we had to scale up the streaming bit, you'd have to duplicate it like a cookie cutter. So these 10 servers that were just serving the streaming customers would have 20% of the whole CPU and memory dedicated to the new subscription service. Well, nobody's subscribing. So you can scale up not your whole application but parts of it, and of course that means you get better margins. So that's how elastic scaling maps to the business goal of margins. So what you end up with is a complex interaction between technologies, the attitude by which you use them, all of which serve speed, scale and margin, which makes your life a lot easier if you like programming computers for a living, because you get to deploy more easily, see the results of your work, and don't have to deal with XML files and the high priests of the data centers, which is what I had to deal with in 2005, and it really, really upset me. It upset me so much, I started a company to address that problem. This is not a joke. I was absolutely distraught. I started programming when I was 9 and programmed all the way to being 25, happily, without speaking to any other person. Or without being told, you can't deploy that and you can't do this. And when I had a job building a web-scale travel agent, it was actually a booking engine for an airline. It was great, it was my dream come true. And when I got there, I had to fill in forms that said which version of Java I needed. And I just wanted, it was horrible situation for me. I'm a creative person, and if I don't see the results of my creativity, like all creative persons, I get upset. So I started Container Solutions to address that single problem. And here we are, 19 years later. Still trying to help people solve that problem. Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, are there any more questions or any questions?
I'd like to ask, what parts of your book have become obsolete since, or close to obsolete already? Well,
so we actually only updated it back in September, so big parts of it. No, I'm just kidding. If you look at the world of artificial intelligence, it's here, right? So all reporting on AI is both speculative, descriptive, partially wrong, nearly always out of date. The way you build cloud native systems actually hasn't changed that much in the last 10 years. So I'm not sure any of it is obsolete. Would we include chapters on the relationship between cloud and training artificial neural networks? I think we probably would in the next version.
We had to do an emergency were building green software, ChatGPT appeared right in the middle of our final draft of it, and we had to go, right, we've got to add a chapter. So it's like you can't shove a chapter now without having it. But cloud-native strategy is quite different because it's more kind of like step back. What's the theory of architecture? And so it doesn't really. So individual things don't matter so much. We did add an extra chapter though, which was the sustainability.
Yeah.
Because that's my thing.
But that brought it more up to date. But the concepts are as old as time. So I remember somebody showing me a message passing system for microservices, and when I founded Container Solutions, I promised I wouldn't program, in the foolish belief that we'd be finished in a few years. I could find a replacement, and then I could go back to coding. And I said, oh shit, I better look at this new tool for message passing. And I looked at it, and I was like, oh, it's COBOL, right? And I'd looked at that about 20 years earlier. So the fundamentals of message passing, services, microservices, decomposition actually hasn't changed much since the 1970s. The technology's changed, but this book is not really about technology, it's about core fundamentals.
Can I add something on that? Do you have anything on computed edge on the book? Sorry.
No, but you can have a free copy tonight and then you can look for yourself. But there's no edge stuff in there, no, even though we are quite interested in that. Are there any questions? Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, do you explain the difference between cloud native and lift and shift?
And we do this. We do.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, we do that.
There's a lot of lift and shift because it's historic stuff that these companies, organisations have.
Yeah.
And they can't quite get back. They don't have the
Yeah.
personnel, the time, the money to actually make it cloud native.
Yeah. So it's a challenge. Have you ever heard anyone?
Summarise the question for the video.
Sorry.
Can you summarise the question for the video?
I think so. If I can remember it. Let me summarise the question for the video. I think the question was: Do we cover in the book? Tell me again.
Lift and shift.
Do we cover the? Yeah, thanks. Do we cover in the book lift and shift and how to deal with that? We do have a section on that. Have you ever heard, in answer to the question, have you ever heard somebody say, what you've got to do is do a lift and shift when you're on the cloud, then re-architecture, re-engineer? Who says that to you? Yeah. People who work at Amazon?
Yeah.
People who work at Amazon?
No. People internally.
Smart people.
It goes back to what you were saying about businesses being nervous about changing technologies. They wanted to change the platform before they changed the structure.
Yeah.
So basically it was lift and shift, put that in the cloud and make sure it works. Then we'll start chewing bits off.
If cost wasn't an issue, it's not a bad strategy. Yeah, we have seen situations, so joking aside, we have seen situations where people do a lift and shift, see the bill, and then it's a forcing function from getting on top of the architecture and driving the costs down. That's not a logical way to do it, but since businesses are full of people, businesses are not logical or rational.
Sometimes governments are under, basically.
Yeah.
I see the appetite for business risk with cloud, and we're talking people still think cloud is this new thing.
Yeah, for some people it is.
The shift and lift.
Yeah. So there is a serious, now definite, sorry, yeah, I'm coming in my 5 minutes. There is a serious issue. So, and I mean deadly serious. So I personally don't have much time for managers who don't put their people first. Now, those people exist. They put their hand up for management for all the wrong reasons, for ego, you name it. What happens in London, and I suppose everywhere, is senior executives love to come in, say bang, we're moving to the cloud, lift and shift, not really considering the proper management of it, the messaging, the change management, lining your ducks up in a row, the HR gap, the skills gap. This is a huge problem because they know they can mess around for 1, 2 or 3 years, stick it on the CV, I've taken this bank to the cloud, I've taken this insurance bank to the cloud, and nobody would be any the wiser. And what's left in the rearview mirror is an absolute mess. This happens all the time. So the reasons for going are not always straightforward. The most rational thing to do is a cloud native assessment, work out your gaps, McKinsey, good old fashioned gap analysis, and then work to close them down. But you need deft leadership and management at all levels. Good executive leadership, good project and middle management, good technical team leads, and mature engineers. This stuff doesn't work with emotionally immature people. Failure is a massive part of development, of creativity. So if you've got performance goal people who love to hit targets that might work in sales, but it's a bit toxic in a creative environment that most of us work in. Okay, fine, I am going to wrap up. So, in terms of the book, we tried to get as many copies as we could, but like Matt said, you've screwed up his spreadsheet by not replying or whatever. Now, if you do put paper inside of it, now you don't have to do this, but we'd be really grateful because the more positive reviews we get, the better. So there's a QR code where if you point your phone at it, we'll take you to your Amazon page. If you could just stick a review in, nice book, obviously read it. Don't make it up, that would be unethical. Yeah. Read it, and if you liked it, put a few stars on, put a few words in. The best review will win a prize at the next DevOps meetup. I will come and give out a prize to the funniest review, the best one. That's the first thing. The second thing, if we run out of books, the management team at Container Solutions have very kindly just panicked and spent £200 on Amazon vouchers. So if somebody doesn't get a physical book, you can get a voucher, order it online. But the same rules apply. Please chuck up a reference, because the verified reference are actually more valuable to us than the non-verified references. And on that note, thank you for letting me do something. Yeah. I was going to say on that note, thank you for letting me do something experimental and something different. I've never done that before. I'm really grateful, and I'm happy to now hand over to Matt, and of course he's going to hand over to Ab.